Vienna, the top most livable city in the world and a role model in social housing that other countries admire us for. This is how we like to see ourselves, or how politicians like to praise themselves. Still, people fear for affordable apartments. The population is increasing and the hunt for flats is getting harder. The city of Vienna has the answer though, Gemeindebau neu, the revival of the golden ages of social housing. But let's start at the beginning. Where do we live now, and what kind of buildings? What is the story behind them? Most of what we like to think of when we think of Vienna are old buildings with ornamented facades which were built in masses in Gründerzeit, the period around the turn of the 19th century. But why this construction boom? Vienna was crowded. Vienna, once one of the biggest cities in the world, was growing very fast and there were not enough apartments for everyone, at least not for the working class. 23% of Vienna's population were Bettgeher, people who didn't have their own place and were renting a bed for just a few hours per day. The municipality passed tax shelters to encourage construction. Huge parts of the city were torn down to make place for these apartment dwellings. Private builders invested, not out of social goodwill, but because of profitability. Rents were still high and conditions bad. Apartments small, sanitary conditions poor, and the density was at its maximum. Critics emerged against this dense housing production by the free market, but efforts to try to encourage social housing failed. Criticizing or not, with 11,000 built flats per year, the period from 1890 to 1914 was the most productive in the history of Vienna. The First World War led to a peak in the housing crisis. In the course of war, more than 200,000 refugees came to Vienna seeking safety. 1916, Vienna's population was at its all-time high. After the war, elections were held. The Socialist Democratic Party won for the first time. The Red majority in Vienna declared housing as the main priority in their political program. Temporary rent control from during the war became a permanent law and ended private investments in housing. As it took years to start a communal housing program, people, not having a place to live, took things in their own hands and started to squat land and build settlements. Another way of providing homes for homeless was a law that made it possible for the municipality to allot people to vacant flats. Finally, from 1924 on, the municipality acted as the main builder. Red Vienna was born. At the same time, Vienna also started an active land policy in which they bought vacant land to control the market price and to build residential buildings. In 1928, the city of Vienna owned 1/4 of Vienna's land. By 1963, already half. After a few years, the proud and productive era ended with civil war, Austro-Fascism, and finally the annexation by Hitler Germany and the Second World War. In World War II, 13% of Vienna's apartments were destroyed. Reconstruction began right away, and the communal housing program restarted a few years later. Huge dwellings in the outskirts of the city were built. After two failed community ideologies, monarchy and National Socialism, the post-1945 generation didn't have the wish for community in housing. During the 50s and 60s, the economy rose and people could afford a better living standard. New building methods were invented and allowed to build faster. People believed in endless progress, individualization, and the separation of living and working. The city was sprawling out while vacancies in the old existing buildings grew. In the 80s, a new sensibility for our old city emerged. Projects to tear down parts of the city were stopped. The city of Vienna adopted a law to give fundings for refurbishing substandard apartments. Most of these apartments had no toilets inside, and some of them didn't even have running water. The law encouraged private investments in housing, as the tax shelters of Gründerzeit did more than 100 years before, and which started the construction boom in the first place. The municipality acted less and less as a builder itself and concentrated more on funding, until they completely stopped the active housing program in 2003. Ties between cooperatives, the municipality, and political parties, as well as the funding system itself, got more and more complex over the years. Today, after many years of a declining population, Vienna was after the First World War at the end of the country, and with the Cold War at the end of the Western world, the city got back into the game with the fall of the Iron Curtain and the entry into the European Union. It took some years, but today many, too many as some probably think, are moving to Vienna. To deal with this population increase, Vienna declared Gemeindebau neu, a new start of the communal housing program, trying to satisfy people who fear for affordable housing. But is it the solution to desperately go back to a glorious past where strong political ideologies formed the housing program? But there are also new forces and ideas. Private people are joining in groups, reclaiming their right to do it themselves, to start their own projects, to build apartment blocks for themselves, serving their own needs and ideas. What does social housing mean to us? Communal housing is a top-down idea for a certain group that cannot afford rents of the free market. Shouldn't housing evolve from the society itself and deal with living space for everyone, giving the right but also the duty to the citizens to co-create their environment? Could the city of Vienna depart from the idea of acting as a builder but to enable others? The municipality, being the biggest apartment and landowner in Vienna, has not only the power to steer housing in a new direction, but the possibility to be the role model in redefining social housing.